I've been doing my own taxes since I was 19 years old. I'm one of those people who actually finds a weird satisfaction in organizing receipts and filling out forms. There's something calming about numbers, about things adding up correctly, about having control over at least one aspect of my life. But this year, everything changed, and it wasn't because the tax code got more complicated. It was because of him. His name is Thaddeus Chen. I know Thaddeus. When I first saw his name on the business card my sister pressed into my hand, I almost laughed. Who names their kid Thaddeus? But she insisted. She said, Jake, you need a professional this year. You started your consulting business, you've got write-offs you don't even know about, and you're going to end up paying way more than you should. Just go see him. One appointment. So I made the appointment. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, that weird time of year when the weather can't decide if it's still winter or finally spring. His office was in one of those converted brownstones in the Arts District, the kind with exposed brick and plants hanging in the windows. Very different from the sterile H&R block I'd gone to once in college. The waiting room smelled like coffee and something else, something clean and slightly sweet. There was a woman at the desk who smiled at me and said he'd be right with me. I sat down and pulled out my phone, scrolling through nothing, just trying to look occupied. Then I heard his voice. Not talking to me, but to someone in his office, and I felt something shift in my chest. It was warm, that voice. Patient. He was explaining something about quarterly estimates to what sounded like an older woman, and there was no condescension in his tone, just genuine care. I found myself listening instead of looking at my phone. When the woman left, she was smiling. That's when he appeared in the doorway. Thaddeus Chen. He was about my height, maybe 35, with black-framed glasses that somehow made him look both intellectual and approachable. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and when he smiled at me, I forgot why I was there for a solid 3 seconds. Jake, he said, extending his hand, I'm Thaddeus, come on back. His office was nothing like I expected. There were the usual filing cabinets and a large desk with 2 monitors, but there were also framed photographs of landscapes, a small jade plant on the windowsill, and a shelf of books that weren't all about tax law. I spotted a worn copy of Ocean Vuong's poetry. That detail stuck with me. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat down, suddenly hyper-aware of my posture, my breathing, the folder of documents clutched in my hands. He settled into his own chair with an easy grace and smiled at me again. That smile. It made me feel like I was the only appointment he had all day, even though I knew that couldn't be true. So, he said, your sister tells me you started your own business this year. Congratulations. That's a big step. Thanks, I said. Yeah, I left my corporate job in June, marketing consulting. It's been going well, actually. Better than I expected. That's great, he said, and he sounded like he meant it. He opened a laptop and pulled up what I assumed was my file. Okay, let's start with the basics, and then we'll dig into the specifics of your business expenses. Sound good? I nodded. Sounds good. We went through the standard questions. Income, previous employment, health insurance. He typed quickly, his fingers confident on the keyboard. Every so often he'd glance up at me and I'd feel that same flutter in my chest. I told myself it was just nerves, tax anxiety, totally normal. Then he asked, are you single or married? Single, I said. He nodded. Type something. Any dependents? No. He looked up at me then, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. He adjusted his glasses, a gesture I would come to recognize as a thinking habit. Okay, he said. Now, this next question isn't on any official form, but I like to ask it because it helps me understand my clients better. I waited. My heart was doing something strange. What matters most to you? He asked. Not in a financial sense necessarily, just in general. What are you working toward? I blinked. That was not a question I'd expected from an accountant. I'd expected him to ask about my home office square footage or my mileage log. Instead, he was looking at me with genuine curiosity, like my answer actually mattered to him. I don't know, I said slowly. I guess I'm working toward freedom, the ability to choose my projects, to have time for the things and people I care about, to build something that's mine. He smiled, and it was softer this time. That's a good answer, he said. Better than most people give me. What do other people say? I asked. Usually something about retirement or buying a house, which are fine goals, don't get me wrong. But they're not usually the whole story. He typed a few more things, then looked back at me. Here's the thing about taxes, Jake. They're not just about numbers. They're about your life. Every deduction, every credit, every form, it all tells a story about how you spend your time, what you value, what you're building. My job isn't just to save you money, it's to understand that story so I can help you tell it in a way that makes sense to the IRS. I'd never thought about taxes like that. I'd certainly never had an accountant talk to me like that. Like I was a person with a story, not just a client with a tax liability. We spent the next hour going through my business expenses. He asked detailed questions, but never made me feel stupid for not knowing the answers. When I mentioned that I'd bought a new laptop for work but hadn't kept the receipt, he didn't lecture me. He just said, "Okay, let's figure out how to reconstruct that purchase." And we did. At one point, I mentioned that I'd traveled to Denver for a client meeting, and he asked how long I'd stayed. 3 days, I said. The meeting was only 1 day, but I'd never been to Denver, so I figured I'd explore a little. "Did you keep your personal days separate from your business days?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted. "I mean, I know the meeting day was for work, but the other two were kind of a mix. I walked around, saw some sights, but I also did some thinking about the project." He nodded thoughtfully. "Here's something most people don't realize," he said. "If you extend a business trip for personal reasons, you can still deduct the flight, because you were flying there primarily for business. The hotel for the business days is deductible, the personal days aren't. But the flight is." "Really?" I said. "I had no idea." "Most people don't," he said. "That's why I'm here." There was a moment of silence, comfortable and warm. He was looking at something on his screen, and I was looking at him. The way the afternoon light came through the window and caught in his hair. The small scar on his left hand. The way he bit his bottom lip slightly when he was concentrating. He looked up suddenly, catching me staring. I felt heat rush to my face, but he didn't seem bothered. Instead, he smiled again, that soft smile that made me feel like I was melting into the chair. "Another question that's not on the form," he said. "What do you do for fun? Outside of work?" I laughed, caught off guard. I don't know. I read a lot. I go running. I've been trying to cook more, but I'm not very good at it yet." "What do you like to read?" he asked. "Mostly fiction, literary stuff, some poetry." His eyebrows went up. "Poetry? That's not something I hear often." I gestured to his bookshelf. "I noticed the Ocean Vuong," I said. "Night sky with exit wounds." He turned to look at the shelf, then back at me, and something shifted in his expression. Delight, maybe. Or recognition. "You know his work?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I actually saw him read once a few years ago. It was incredible." Thaddeus leaned back in his chair, and for a moment we weren't talking about taxes at all. We were just two people discovering a shared love of something beautiful. He told me about the first time he'd read On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous and how it had made him cry on a plane. I told him about my favorite poem, Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong, and how I'd copied it into a notebook and kept it on my nightstand. Time did something strange. It seemed to both slow down and speed up. I lost track of how long we'd been talking. At some point, he glanced at his computer screen and said, "Oh, wow, I have another appointment in 10 minutes. We should probably wrap up the financial stuff." "Right," I said, feeling oddly disappointed. "Of course." We scheduled a follow-up appointment for the next week. He said he'd need to review everything in detail and prepare my returns, and we'd go over them together before filing. As I stood to leave, he stood too, and we shook hands again. His grip was firm and warm, and he held on just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "It was good to meet you, Jake," he said. "Really good." "You too," I said, and I meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I walked out of his office in a daze. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes before starting the engine, trying to figure out what had just happened. I'd gone in to get my taxes done. I'd come out feeling like I'd made some kind of connection I couldn't quite name. The week between appointments was strange. I kept thinking about him, about the way he'd listened to me, really listened, like what I was saying mattered. about the poetry on his shelf, about that smile. I told myself I was being ridiculous. He was my accountant. He was probably straight. He was just being nice, being professional. But then Tuesday came again, and I was back in his office, and the moment I walked in and saw him, I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was there. Something real. He'd prepared my returns, and they were immaculate. He walked me through every line, explaining things in a way that made sense. He'd found deductions I never would have thought of. He'd organized everything perfectly. But more than that, he'd added little notes in the margins of the printed summary, reminders for next year, suggestions for better record keeping. He'd put thought into this, real thought, more than just doing the job. "This is amazing," I said, flipping through the pages. "Thank you. Seriously." "You're welcome," he said. "I'm glad I could help." We filed the returns electronically, right there in his office. It took maybe 10 minutes, and then we were done. My taxes were finished. There was no reason for me to stay, no reason for another appointment. "I should let you get to your next client," I said, but I didn't move. "Actually," he said, and then he paused. He took off his glasses and cleaned them with the edge of his shirt, a nervous gesture that made him suddenly more human, more vulnerable. "Actually, I don't have another appointment for an hour." "Oh," I said. "And I was wondering," he continued, still not quite meeting my eyes, "if you'd want to grab coffee sometime. Not about taxes, just coffee." My heart stopped, then started again, faster. "Like coffee?" I asked, immediately cringing at how awkward that sounded. He laughed, a real laugh, and finally looked at me. "Yes, Jake. Like coffee." "I'd love to," I said. We went to coffee 3 days later. A small place near his office, the kind with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. We talked for 2 hours, about poetry and running and the books we were reading and the places we wanted to travel. About coming out, his story and mine. About building businesses and taking risks and what it means to live authentically. He told me about growing up in a traditional Chinese family, about being the oldest son, about the pressure to be perfect, about studying accounting because it was practical, but falling in love with it because it let him help people in concrete ways, about coming out at 28 and losing some family members, but gaining himself. I told him about my own journey, about knowing I was gay since I was 14, but not saying it out loud until college, about the corporate job that paid well, but slowly suffocated me, about leaving to start my own business and how terrifying and exhilarating it had been. When we finally left the coffee shop, it was getting dark. We stood on the sidewalk, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Definitely yes." We started seeing each other regularly after that. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks through the city. Long walks turned into him cooking for me in his apartment, something simple and perfect, pasta with vegetables from the farmer's market, turned into me reading poetry aloud to him while he did dishes, turned into falling asleep on his couch during a movie and waking up with his arm around me. It was slow and careful and absolutely terrifying. I kept waiting for the moment when it would fall apart, when I'd realize I'd imagined the connection between us. But that moment never came. Instead, every time I saw him, the feeling deepened. Every conversation revealed new layers. Every shared silence felt comfortable and right. One night, about 2 months after that first coffee, we were sitting on his balcony. It was late spring by then, finally warm enough to be outside without a jacket. He'd made tea, something floral and delicate, and we were watching the lights of the city flicker on as the sun set. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Always," he replied. "That first appointment when you asked me what mattered most to me, was that really something you ask all your clients?" He was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "No," he admitted. "That was just for you." "Why?" I asked. He turned to look at me, and in his eyes I saw everything I'd been feeling reflected back. "Because from the moment you walked into my office, I wanted to know everything about you," he said. "The tax stuff was just an excuse to keep you there longer." I kissed him then. Finally. It felt like coming home and leaping off a cliff at the same time. He kissed me back, gentle and sure, his hand coming up to cup my face. When we pulled apart, we were both smiling. "I'm really glad my sister made me hire an accountant," I said. He laughed. I'm really glad you listened to her. Now it's been a year. Tax season has come around again, and yes, I'm still his client. But I'm also so much more than that. I'm the person he comes home to. The person who reads poetry to him on Sunday mornings. The person who keeps trying and failing to cook elaborate meals while he watches with patient amusement. The person who loves him. People ask us how we met, and we always smile at each other before answering. At his office, we say. He was doing my taxes. And then we laugh, because that's technically true. But it's not the real story at all. The real story is that he asked questions that weren't on any form. Questions about what mattered, about who I was, about what I wanted from life. He saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth knowing, worth pursuing, worth loving. Sometimes the most extraordinary things happen in the most ordinary places. Sometimes love finds you when you're just trying to figure out your deductions. Sometimes the person who helps you make sense of your numbers helps you make sense of your life. My name is Jake, and I found love in the most unexpected place. With an accountant named Thaddeus who taught me that the best connections are the ones that add up to something neither of you expected. Something that can't be calculated or predicted. Something that just feels right. Total_char_count 16,847.